Good morning and welcome to the John P. Mayhew Foundation's second annual Hero's Journey Symposium, From Wounds to Wellness, Building Better Pathways to Recovery. My name is Susan I. Ronick. I'm a board-certified speech-language pathologist working in rehabilitative medicine, and it is a privilege to welcome you here today. How many of you are here for the first time? Okay, good. Wonderful. A special welcome. We're delighted that you made the time to come today. We have an exceptional program, and for those of you who are new, we want to give a little bit of background on the John P. Mayhew Foundation and how it came to be. John lived 27 years. He was the only child of Kevin and Mary Mayhew before he succumbed to issues from secondary post-traumatic stress that led to his addiction and tragic death from an opiate overdose. Once his mother embraced the pain, if a parent can ever do that, instead of getting angry, she got organized. This foundation is the result of that organization, the passion and a mother's determination, in her words, to change the narrative about the challenges of PTSD, TBI, drug addiction, and suicide to create better pathways to recovery. Hence, from wounds to wellness. Our youth and our national well-being are at stake. I'd like you to remember the number 20. File that away, the number 20. Last year when I stood before you, the number was 23 trending to 22. Today, it is 20. That is the number of veterans we lose daily to suicide. The purpose of this event today is threefold: to educate, to facilitate, and to collaborate. Education is the first step in removing the stigma, the embarrassment, the suffering and silence to bring mental health out of the shadows. And it's been in the shadows a long time, has it not? We want to treat the invisible wounds to let veterans and their family members know that they are not alone, because service affects much more than the veteran. It affects the family and those around them. We want to help locate resources, so this is the purpose of education. In the area of facilitation, the foundation strives to support research and treatment options for mental health conditions, including PTSD, TBI, opiate drug addiction, and suicide. The symposium organizers have organized an outstanding group of subject experts from many walks of life, including educators, faith leaders, healthcare, the addiction mental health communities, advocates, legislators, and veterans and their family members. In this framework, we're most grateful to them for agreeing to lead and participate in the panels. We're featuring 4 panels today. Our military families, facilitated by Kelly Ruska of the National Military Family Association. Science and research, facilitated by Greg Payne of MITRE. Beyond Our Military, Unsung Heroes, facilitated by Kathleen Koch, founder and president of Leaders Link, and Developing Better Stepping Stones, facilitated by Dr. Susie Carmack. In addition, we're going to have a mini panel on the art and healing, art and animal therapy, mindfulness, music, and yoga, and a visit from Semper Canine, our veteran companion animals, our Sullies. In the field of collaboration, the foundation endeavors to develop a public information campaign, identify policy and research gaps, share best practices, and launch a platform for collaboration, information sharing, and discussion, and that's where all of you come in. We have the power to inspire and give hope, to let those dealing with mental health issues and their family members know that they are not alone. We have the ability to make those resources accessible and to take that number from 20 to 0. And that is why you're here today. Thank you for joining the conversation. We invite you to a day of productive discussions and debate to elevate this conversation to the national level. And now, please join me in welcoming to the stage the engine that drives this train, the founder of the John P. Mayhew Foundation, John's mother, Colonel U.S. Army retired Mary Lowe Mayhew. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. The hazards of being in Washington, D.C. are the cherry blossoms and traffic and all kinds of congressional activity. But thank you, Susan, for the wonderful introduction. And good morning to everyone who's here today. I would officially like to welcome you all as we begin our second annual Heroes Journey Symposium and bring together thought leadership to bear on brain health issues associated with post-traumatic stress, traumatic brain injury, addiction, and suicide. As we begin our discussion today, I want to add to Susan's numbers of 20. I want you to think about two numbers, 43 and 64, and I will come back to those in a moment. During my years of military service, I grew very concerned about the many service members, veterans, and the military families who were impacted by primary and secondary post-traumatic stress, traumatic brain injury, addiction, and suicide. I had seen too often the challenges associated with stigma in seeking care, and when one sought care, it was difficult to access resources on a timely basis. But what was also problematic was a lack of general awareness about topics such as pain management, traumatic stress, and just mental health in general. All too frequently, this lack of awareness led to career-ending events and even worse, death, many of which could have been prevented. In fact, those same challenges impacted our own family, resulting in the death of our son John in 2016 from an accidental drug overdose. But these challenges right now go way beyond our military and veteran communities. Our first responders, journalists, and volunteers who are equally important to the security and protection of our great nation, have also seen alarming losses in their own ranks. If we look at the number of people, just not our veterans, we have lost, it is staggering. We're well beyond the 20-plus veterans who will die by suicide each day. But those numbers I asked you to think about just a moment ago, 43 and 64, are numbers that should truly alarm us. While we are here today, during the next 8 hours, we could lose 43 people to suicide and another 64 to drug overdose. That's 100 people while we are here during this symposium. And if we look at that, that's 300 people a day. If we examine the combined deaths attributed to addiction and suicides for 2016, it's greater than what we assess into our Army every year. In 2016, the losses to addiction alone were greater than the combat deaths of the Vietnam War. If we combine deaths for addiction and suicide over a 2-year period for 2016 and 2017, it is greater than the population of many towns and cities. Imagine the population of Alexandria, Virginia, gone, or Boulder, Colorado, gone, or even my husband's hometown of Green Bay, Wisconsin, gone. We are losing our citizens to brain health issues at truly staggering pace. The economic and human capital losses to our innovation and our workforce are difficult to measure, and it's not often discussed. In fact, this crisis is more than a public health crisis. It is a national security crisis that will have a long-term implication on the health and well-being of our country. One thing during this whole time that has confounded me is that while the brain is the most important organ in our body, it is also the one least understood. It is one that is subject to hidden wounds, and the only one that seems to get ignored when it is injured. We can't see the physical injury that is there, but it carries more pain than any physical wound could carry, and even more challenging to heal. It seems like not too long ago, people were afraid of the stigma of chronic health conditions such as diabetes, cancer, or HIV. And now, living in recovery with these diseases is celebrated with milestones. Dealing with brain health conditions should be no different, but it starts with personal courage to face the illness, and when one does, systems should be in place to ensure a safe, stable, and sustainable recovery, just like cancer or diabetes or HIV. We have already proven that people will have healthy lives managing chronic health conditions. Unfortunately today, though, we will hear too many stories about mental health and access to care, gaps in research. However, more importantly, we will hear from our esteemed panelists the importance of education, early intervention, getting research into practice, and making smart policy, as well as the science and data to back up these many stories and validate the urgent need to change how we deal with mental health care in our communities and in our nation. We must begin to talk about it and take action if we are going to truly change the tide on how brain health is impacting our communities, and hope for greater and better change. A community dedicated to making a difference and talking about it. The John P. Mayhew Foundation is driven not only to bring hope, but more importantly, to bring that thought leadership to the forefront of this discussion, to educate our communities on early intervention and access to resources, to facilitate that awareness, and bring thought leadership to bear that will truly, truly make a difference in how we deal with mental health in our country. Together, we can build better pathways of recovery from wounds to wellness. Our nation and our youth are depending upon us. Thank you.
My presentation today is going to be thinking about families from a different perspective, specifically the work that we've done for some time, understanding the impact of both physical, visible, as well as invisible injuries on military service members, as well as their families and children. I think one important point that we should make is that oftentimes there can be a tendency to be thinking about families in dichotomous ways, where there are healthy families, there are sick families, and it springs from a focus on deficit-based models, where we're really looking at what's wrong within a family. But today what I'd like to do as we're talking is to understand families in a much more dynamic way, thinking about the mechanisms of risk that are associated with the challenges that they face, understanding how they impact normative processes, and then also to see those as opportunities for intervention and recovery. So a little bit about our work at the Center for the Study of Traumatic Stress, which is located at the Uniformed Services University, and that is where I work as Associate Director and run the Child and Family Program there. The center is directed by Dr. Robert Ursano, who is a national and international expert on trauma, post-traumatic stress disorder. And the center is an education, training, and research center that focuses on disaster, war, terrorism, bioterrorism, and trauma, and its impact on individuals and communities. And our work in the Child and Family Program has really been an emphasis on conducting research associated with military family stress, looking at the impact of deployment, injury, illness, death, child maltreatment within military as well as other American families. I would turn your attention to the website, which is www.cstsonline.org, where there is considerable information, fact sheets that could be available or is available, and it could be helpful regarding a number of the topics that we're talking about today. This is just, I think this is a light here, or maybe not. On the left-hand side, this was a forum that was conducted through the center that focused on military families in transition, stress, resilience, and well-being, and the summary of that is available online. We've also conducted work and done consultation with programs like Sesame Workshop in their Talk, Listen, Connect series in support of military families. Unfortunately, injury and illness are sometimes a consequence of combat. Since the start of wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, over 50,000 service members were air evacuated back to the United States due to a variety of physical injuries that include amputations, spinal cord injuries, burns, head trauma. But in addition, there are estimated several 100,000 that have been affected by PTSD and TBI based upon exposures in combat environments. These disorders, these experiences impact the processes that can keep families healthy and strong. So normative processes within families, like the ability to connect, to be emotionally supportive to each other, to communicate effectively, to share common goals, to build future hopes, to maintain safe and healthy family environments, all can be impacted by the effects of combat injuries and illnesses. And we know this not only from the military, but also from quite a bit of work that's been done in the civilian community that focuses on the family stress model, in which those processes within families that largely support the health and well-being of all members can be undermined. Another important point to family stress model is the idea of linked lives. So in other words, while we oftentimes provide care in a patient-focused environment in the healthcare system where we're targeting the patient, the impact of these disorders or conditions on individuals broadly impacts those individuals with whom they are linked and within families. Some, if not all, many of these conditions have chronicity. In other words, they continue over time and they can lead to prolonged effects on families. So one example of that that's been of interest more recently and has been discussed and recognizing the impact not only on military but other families in the United States that are faced by chronic illness is the idea of caregiving, which can be extensive and can impact family members and can undermine both the health of spouses, partners, and children, depending upon the caregiving needs. So I show this schematic to try to really understand the impact of an injury on a family. On the left-hand side, you can see family stress levels, and on the bottom is the time from the start of the injury over time. We've referred to this as the injury recovery trajectory to remind people that an injury is not an event, it's a process, and it leads to a cascading change in both the impact on family as well as the requirement of families. So initially, through the initial injury, there's a fear of loss of the parent or the service member or the spouse or the military spouse. It can result in medical stabilization and then hospitalization at sites that are distant from where the family lives. So it can result in separations. It can result in families being broken apart and different family members living in different places. Hospital visits in which young children sometimes are brought into the hospital and they may or may not be prepared for the sights and sounds of what they may see there, as well as longer-term impact where there are maybe changes in the service member, both in terms of their interaction with their children, their interaction with their spouses, change in personality, cognition, or emotional well-being, as well as moves from community. So shifting from a life within a military installation now into a civilian community, if they in fact leave the service, that can be to locations that may or may not understand the cultural influences of that family and the military experiences that they've had. So transitions from military service to veteran service, it's important to remember that there are inherent military protective factors, both for service members as well as family members, dependent family members, such things like insured income, available housing, access to medical care, access to many personal and community services that are available on military installations, as well as a sense of meaning and purpose that's associated with a duty-driven life or ongoing military activity. But many of these protective factors, in fact, don't follow individuals into veterans' lives. So it's important to remember that there can be a diminution in the kinds of protective, community, supportive resource processes that are available for military families after the departure. There are other transitional challenges that may have to do with the long-term impact and transitions in care. We know that there can be problems in community reintegration, as well as clinical engagement. So despite great efforts to support transition of care, there continues to be problems with reintegration, disruptions in care, as well as stigma that can decrease the willingness of an injured service member or a veteran to seek out help or services within the community. Another important limitation as we think about families and the impact on families is that most healthcare, as I'd mentioned, is delivered in patient-focused models that oftentimes exclude family members. This may be due to a lack of clinical experience. This may have to do with reimbursement structures in terms of how healthcare providers are paid. It might have to do with certain systems, although there are models in place to try to support better family involvement. The veterans, the VA system, for example, is less structured to provide that kind of care over time. And that there also may be hesitation on the part of the service member or veteran to include their military family members. The other part of transition challenges is that we tend to be responsive to certain bad outcomes. So violence within a family is not a common occurrence within military or veteran families, but it does occur, and it is linked to some of the disorders that may be present, whether that's PTSD or traumatic brain injury. Rather than addressing those in a proactive way, oftentimes we respond to those as a result of an incident, and that response can be more reactive, punitive, or legalistic, rather than supportive of the family's needs. So we've talked some, Mary discussed the idea of invisible injuries, post-traumatic stress disorder and traumatic brain injury. There's a robust literature describing the negative effects of PTSD and TBI on interpersonal relationships, and there's a reason for this. These injuries are largely manifested through changes in behavior, personality, cognitive function, and emotional regulation. So the family can be a crucible in which these kinds of difficulties or changes are played out with the closest and most intimate partners that a service member or a veteran has. What do we know about the impact? Some have described it as an ambiguous loss, Pauline Boss, which is related to the idea that the service member returns home in a way that's different than the way they left, resulting in a sense of loss for what the family had and no longer has. There can be a negative impact on parenting, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. Both of these disorders have been associated with decreases in marital satisfaction, poorer family functioning, greater family distress, higher levels of family violence in certain circumstances, particularly with comorbidities of substance use disorders, as well as disruptions in parent-child relationships and childhood well-being. So to give a sense of how then we can understand how these risk factors interplay or intersect with what it is that we want to be seeing, for example, in a parenting model, we look at on the top, we see the PTSD symptom clusters: intrusions, re-experiencing, avoidance symptoms, negative cognitions, and hyperarousal. And then on the left-hand side, we see those functions that we would like to see within a parenting relationship with children, like emotional closeness, communication, supervision, discipline, safety, impulse control, leadership, and hopefulness. And we can see that there are certain symptoms within post-traumatic stress disorder that are likely to complicate those parenting processes just based upon their effect. So avoidance, for example, is likely going to reduce emotional closeness, communication, and supervision, and that hyperarousal may be problematic for things like effective parental authoritative discipline or safety or impulse control. The other consideration that we have in thinking about the health and well-being of families is understanding them contextually within a community. So again, moving away from this idea that families tend to be either sick or healthy, we see them on a continuum. And on the left-hand side, we see that continuum can range from those who are least, the smallest population are those that are truly ill, families that are in more disequilibrium at risk, and then the vast majority of families, even when affected by many of these disorders, are healthy. If we correspond that to models that have been described in the Institute of Medicine report, their protractor of prevention and intervention, we see that the range of intervention and prevention may vary depending upon the needs of the family. So it's not a one-size-fits-all, but there's a range of programs that may include things like education about the illness and the effects on families, engaging the family directly to better identify strategies for healthy communication, problem solving, emotion regulation, and conflict management. And then in very high-risk situations, having to address things like safety planning or possibly identifying other individuals in the family that would benefit from their own mental health services. So I want to talk a little bit about this concept of family-centered care, which I think a number of us within the field have identified as an important way of thinking about the way we meet the needs of military service members, particularly those who are ill and injured. It's a paradigm that's been used in the civilian world, addressing a number of illnesses or conditions, including parental depression, HIV, and in fact, there are models within the military that have been employed, developed, employed, and have an evidence base that include Project Focus, the ADAPT model that Abby Gewirtz has been working on in Minnesota, Strong Bonds, Ellen DeVoe in Boston University, all of which that focus on not only the health and well-being of the individual service member, but targeting those areas that are really family functioning areas, areas that have to do with, again, developing support within the family, within the marriage, within the parent-child relationships that build strength and hopefulness within the family. So we don't have an opportunity or time to go through all of this, but exactly or ultimately, what are the goals of this kind of an approach? Well, we want to maintain a physical, safe, and structured environment, engage required community resources, because there are times when individuals can be isolated and are not help-seeking, so we want to encourage all family members to be help-seeking. Develop and share knowledge to build greater understanding of the injury or the illness within the family, as well as how the family is doing. Build a positive and emotionally safe and warm family environment. Master and model important interpersonal skills like problem solving and conflict resolution. And then, even with the presence of these disorders within the family, find a way to maintain a vision of hope and future optimism where family members can enjoy each other and they can continue to have sustained, healthy, and supportive relationships within the family. So I just want to highlight one of these areas and some of the work that we've done that focuses on the importance of communication, especially in families with young children. So this was a public education campaign that we conducted at the Center for the Study of Traumatic Stress called Courage to Care, Courage to Talk. And it was how we understood the fact that many families really had very little understanding about how to discuss injuries within their home. That service providers and parents both were very unclear about what kind of language to use, particularly with young children, and the importance of talking with children. Parents tend to do one of two things when they share unpleasant or difficult information. Either they share too much or they share too little. So helping them understand the developmental requirements of a child, what to say, how much to say. So one example, when I was at Walter Reed, we asked a spouse of a service member who had been amputated what she told her 3-year-old daughter in preparation for the visit to the hospital, and she said, I didn't know what to say. So I just allowed her to come in and to see it, and then I guess we were going to figure it out from there, just because she wasn't clear about how to talk about something that is as complicated or as difficult as that. So some of the goals related to communication, especially for children, develop an age-appropriate understanding, what happened to the injured parent or the ill parent, and we're talking about whether physical injuries or we're talking about helping them understand the changes that they see in their parent that are invisible and why that might be occurring. Talk with them about the required medical care and necessary separations if those take place. help children accept the fact that they did not create any of the problems that they now see in their families, because children tend to be very self-centered and oftentimes think it's their responsibility for what's happened. So how we help them understand, in fact, what is actually going on in the family, to learn to deal with the emotional consequences associated with the injury, to accept the fact that the parent who's returned may be different, but still is their parent and is someone that they can maintain a healthy and positive relationship with, and that to help adjust to the new family solution or situation by staying hopeful, having fun, and maintaining positive future goals. Just want to share 2 fact sheets that our center put together. This, again, has to do with the importance of creating and building greater understanding for military family members, whether that is children, whether it's spouses, whether it's extended family. So the one on the left is related to understanding the impact of TBI on military families and children, and the one on the right, reintegration and intimacy. So there were a lot of questions related to intimacy within relationships upon return from combat deployment, the impact of PTSD and other invisible injuries. So a few final comments. One I want to say is that I'm pleased to see a burgeoning of interest in study of military children and families in comparison to prior to 2001, where there was very little information about the unique needs and cultural considerations within military families. And this has led to some wonderful academic collaborations, military-civilian collaborations, and also research and community partnerships where researchers have gone into communities to better understand challenges faced within those communities related to military families, and to work with the community to build models that can better support and assist. For those who were unaware, the Future of Children several years back had put together a volume that is focused on military and children and families. It's accessible online at futureofchildren.org, and would encourage, for those who are interested in looking at a range of issues, both in terms of understanding the strengths as well as the challenges of military families. This is a great resource for that purpose. I've had the good fortune of sitting as a committee member on an Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine Committee on Military Family Well-Being. The results of that committee, the report will be out this summer, and I believe it'll have some important information that would be relevant to this audience about how best to support the well-being of military families. I want to thank you for your attention, and my email address is up there. If anyone would be interested in being in touch, please feel free to do so. Thank you very much.
You were highlighting the effects of injury on the family. The National Military Family Association, the Elizabeth Dole Foundation, with support from Wounded Warrior Project, have in the next, I would say, 2 weeks, are releasing a survey that's being done by the University of Texas at Austin that's highlighting effects of, it's a parent reported, but the effects of caregiving and the caregiving situation on military children. And so it's going to be very interesting to see the results of that, because what we've discovered is that there really is very little information about this particular population. And last summer we hosted, along with Elizabeth Dole Foundation, a forum where we brought together researchers, caregivers, and community organizations that are working with caregiving families. And one of the caregivers, talking about how age-appropriate explanation. As you were speaking, I was reminded of a caregiver who was talking about her spouse had a brain injury, and how she was describing that brain injury, or actually how her children so adeptly described his brain injury as a hermit crab, and that when dad was feeling bad and, was feeling like he wanted to be isolated, he would go inside his shell. But when he was feeling good and was interacting. Well, dad was out, and he was, he was out playing. And, for her kids were 7 and 8, and I was just struck at just such a simple way, but, it really captured it, and the children were able to understand it. So I think that it just highlights how age-appropriate is so important.
No, Kelly, I think those are great comments. I think the comment about caregiving is so important, just because, and again, I think if there's anything about this panel that would be important to get across is the contextual nature of family within the context of addressing these illnesses or injuries. So the fact that families are really, the closest relations of people who are experiencing and dealing with this, and that the linked lives idea, the fact that this is not just something that happens within a family, but the effect reverberates throughout the family and everyone is involved, and caregiving, I think, is really an important point. I'll make a comment about, I think the importance of clear understanding of disorders for children and understanding it. So I was running a group with teenagers of parents who had PTSD. This was actually at one of the NMFA summer camps. And I asked the question of the group, what is post-traumatic stress disorder? These were teenagers. They were not young people. And it was very difficult for them to be able to just describe what in fact that meant. The one definition that one girl said that I thought was really interesting, she was about 15 years old, and she said, my dad has PTSD, and when I want to go out, and I want to go out with my friends, and I wear short skirts, and he says, no, you can't do that. She said, that PTSD is a real problem for me. It was like, well, that's not PTSD, but it also, it's funny, but I think it also reflects the fact of how people relate, how children relate, what a disorder is, what it is not, in relation to healthy parenting, and giving kids an understanding, like a hermit crab, I think is an excellent way of them just understanding how they're going to relate, what it means, that it's not their responsibility, but also that they can get a better understanding that their dad doesn't dislike them, but it's just sometimes he needs to pull back from them.
Well, so now we're going to sort of switch gears a bit, because Dr. Koza's been working with military families for decades. And now Trish has embarked on this project that you saw in the video. And Trish is not a military family, and is, what are some of the things that you've learned? Although obviously the focus was not on the military systems, but was there anything that you learned while working on this project?
Yes, actually, this project, we are filming this next film addressing bipolar disorder this June, so we are still in pre-production. But I am sitting in today for Colonel and Monica Berry, who had a family emergency and were not able to attend this morning. And that was the family you saw in the video. And I don't have experience with military families, but I do have a lot of experience with mental illness and mental health challenges affecting our youth today. And I love Dr. Koza's program addressing the youth, including the entire family. I think we underestimate children's ability to process what's going on around them. And if they are not told truthfully what's going on, they will, as you noted, internalize it. Oh, what did I do? What did I do wrong? So at the Glow Media Project, we actually have a series of short films addressing various mental health topics in an effort to reduce the stigma and change misconceptions and change the conversation and let children, and especially teenagers, realize that mental health affects everybody.
So we want to get the audience involved in this discussion. Is there anyone that has any questions so far?
My name is Teresa, and I work with an organization that works with wounded, ill, and injured at military hospitals and some VA polytrauma centers. And my question centers around a lot of these resources, some wonderful materials and things, but 2 blocks away from your center, doctor, is the WTU. And right now, all of those are consolidating, and there will be one major WTU down in Fort Belvoir. And so those who are on active duty, it looks like we have more Guard and Reserve families than we do active duty families. Active duty families, we had everything. Guard and Reserve tend to be home. So in terms of getting this information to those Guard and Reserve families who don't interact with a military installation, who typically are not receiving care through the VA or any other government agency, how do we bridge that gap between the research, the materials, and those things that are available to active duty families versus those who are Guard and Reserve, who represent an even greater hidden population out in Middle America?
An excellent question. I think some of it may have to do within the context of to what degree families are present even in the minds of the treatment team for those who are present with the service member at the WTU. So a lot of times, much of the focus, especially when we're talking about traumatic brain injury, specifically PTSD, when we think about the targets for PTSD, a lot of times we're focusing on very specific targets that are related to the service members, such as like hyperarousal or nightmares or avoidance. And in what ways can we begin discussions with the service members and thinking about how those symptoms are affecting them within the interpersonal relationships that they have in their life, whether it be with their family members or with others? So I think the first part of it is to educate the service member that, okay, you're here for your own treatment, but what we also know is that the challenges that you're facing, we recognize are likely to affect your relationship with your spouse, with your children, and let's talk about that a little bit, and let's talk about what your experience of that has been. So many of these people, when they come back, if they come directly back to a WTU and they haven't even seen their family yet, they may not be aware of how it's going to affect those relationships. So part of it is educating them about that. I think the other question is to what degree, even when families are distant, that clinicians can engage those family members in some ways to help them understand. Of course, this always needs to be with the permission of the service member, patient, just that's because the way our system works, but recognizing that the spouse back home may have maybe an important link, not only in terms of addressing the impact of that disorder on the family, but also in understanding how best they can understand their service member who's ill and support the service member through whatever injury recovery or illness recovery they're going through. So I don't know that we have some good models. I know that there are some groups that have employed like telemedicine approaches to bring families into a program to be participating in actual treatments. I'd like to see more of that because I do feel like it's an important element of care that doesn't always get recognized or addressed in the medical setting. And part of the problem there too is that I think that sometimes it probably requires a multidisciplinary approach to it. So, if you're talking about within a healthcare system, the focus may be more, again, patient-centered care as opposed to a broader family-centered approach to the treatment.
Stephanie?
Hi, I'm Stephanie Keegan. I had a son who was a sergeant in the Army. He died after his service due to an infection related to his IV drug use while he waited for treatment for PTSD from the VA. I also have another son who is struggling with a mental health diagnosis. We are a primarily civilian family, and my question is for how are you going to distribute your film once it's completed so that the vast majority of the civilian world, whether they are dealing with a military family member who has a mental health diagnosis or a non-military family member, the children around my children who have struggled need to understand what is happening to the friend sitting next to them. So how do you distribute that film to share it with people who will never really understand through personal experience?
Thank you. That's a great question, and I really appreciate you sharing your story, and I'm terribly sorry for your loss. I started the Glow Media Project as a reaction to, well, my own grief. I lost a son 7 years ago to an opiate overdose. My surviving son is in recovery from opiate addiction and was a very close friend of John Mayhew's. Distributing our films is, we are a civilian-based organization, and we distribute the films directly to schools and through some partnerships with like-minded organizations, including digital streaming subscription series. That's a mouthful, I know. Discovery Education has our first film, which addresses prescription medicine abuse, particularly opiates and ADHD medication, et cetera. And we're in negotiations with them to pick up our next films, including this one, addressing bipolar disorder. We also just signed a contract with one of Discovery's major competitors called Infobase, and they have a K through 12, again, digital streaming subscription series, which is in several, they're not in every state, Discovery's everywhere, but Infobase is, they're in 9 or 10 states, and they're starting to expand. So those are our major distribution channels. We also directly market to organizations or schools. I go to conferences and meet with school counselors and healthcare professionals and the like. I'd also just like to mention, I know this is a military family panel, and while I'm not a military family yet, I was speaking with Dr. Kaza prior to coming up here today. My daughter is waiting with bated breath to hear if she's been accepted to medical school. She's been waitlisted at USIS and is really hoping that she will be going there in the fall. And I will be a military mom.
Yay! Well, and Trish, I have to ask, is there anything that gives you pause about that?
Hello, yes, everything Dr. Kaza's been talking about, everything I've learned through Mary Lowe and Kevin's journey, and the Berries, who are not with us today, but you saw them in the video. I feel like I'm uniquely equipped to be a military mom, dealing with mental health challenges only because of my own personal background, but boy, am I scared. I am really scared, and I applaud you all for your bravery in just being military families. It's an honor to be amongst you.
Well, and I do think that that somewhat highlights a challenge, and I think Stephanie could speak to this as well, is that, as an organization that represents military families, we use the term family in the broadest sense of the term, not only the immediate family, but parents, siblings, aunts, uncles, that support network for the service member. And so, but I do think, and I've heard it many times, that it's particularly challenging for the parent. Because it is, I think that the services have gotten much better in terms of reaching out and providing communication mechanisms, but that it is particularly challenging. They tend to focus, the service member didn't have a family until they got married, has been, I think, the thought process. And as I said, it's gotten much better, but I still think that it is a challenge. And sometimes, as Dr. Koza pointed out, especially when you're dealing with a wounded, ill, or injured service member, reminding the practitioners and that there is a family behind that service member.
Yeah, and I think, and Trish, just to be, I know we're talking about some of the most challenging aspects of the military, but that there is tremendous joy, opportunity, meaning through military service that we don't want to forget as part of this, and also recognizing that, and I think this speaks to, Kelly, what you were referring to, that most of that military community and military family really relates largely to the service member and his or her dependents. So, and it's within the military community. So there can be a lot of support within the military community. Some of the challenges are if you sit outside of that system, or if as a service member you leave the service and then move on to places where you may not have the same access to that kind of support and service.
Well, I think we're done. Thank you all for your flexibility. I appreciate it very much.
Please join me in thanking Kelly Ruska and the panelists, Dr. Coates and Trish, for their wonderful, wonderful program. Thank you.